Hi guys, welcome to As Simple as Possible. Now we are going to start with the series for AAA revision of ACCA professional exams. Now, this will be a series of shorter videos that will help you in your revision journey on the go. So, let's start. Chapter 1. What factors have led to the growth in regulation of audit profession? Financial scams, standardization, globalization, and competitiveness in audit sector, which means that the unethical services that are being provided by the audit firms, like offering non-audit services to audit clients. Next point, what is money laundering? It involves 3 steps. First is placement of the money that you have laundered, then layering, which is putting it into the different modes to make the black money into white, and then integration, putting together all the white money in one place. So what are the money laundering offences from the auditor's perspective? Offences. First, acquiring or possessing or using, concealing criminal property. Second, failing to report. Third, tipping off a client of suspicions. Next, what are the international efforts to combat money laundering? Financial Action Task Force sets the standards and policies to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. What is the ACCA guidance for it? In order to assess the members, the ACCA has included guidance on anti-money laundering within the ACCA rulebook alongside the Code of Ethics and Conduct. What are the key elements of this guidance? Internal controls and policies that should be there. Client identification. Record keeping of those clients and everything else that we are doing for them. Recognition of suspicion. How did you recognize that someone is of suspicious nature or some transaction is of suspicious nature? Reporting those suspicious transactions. And lastly, tipping off. Next, what is client identification? KYC enables the audit firm to understand its client's business well enough to spot any unusual business activity. This assists the firm in identifying suspicions of money laundering. Risk-based approach. On any assignment, the auditor should assess the risk. Assess the risk of money laundering activities. Clearly, every circumstance is different. So here are the key risk factors that you can see as an auditor to identify if there are any suspicions of money laundering. First, excessive use of wire transfers. Second, a pattern that after a deposit, patterned deposits, So after a particular deposit, the same amount is wired to another financial institution. Third is large currency or bearer instrument transactions. Next, repeated deposits. Just below the threshold, you are transferring repeated deposits, monitoring threshold, so it will not be highlighted. Next, high value deposits, which is not characteristic of the type of account that we are handling. A lot of secrecy over transactions. And lastly, transactions are routed through several jurisdictions. So A, B, C. So from A, if I have to pay C, instead of paying C, I will pay to B, and then B will pay to C. So these kind of transactions, these are suspicious of suspicious nature. Next is ISA 250. It is consideration of laws and regulations in an audit of financial statements. So when designing and performing audit procedures and in evaluating and reporting the results thereof, the auditor should recognize that non-compliance by the entity with laws and regulations may materially affect the financial statements. So non-compliance of whom? Of the entity whom we are auditing can lead to materially affect financial statements. Okay. So what is the responsibility of the entity or the management here? It is management's responsibility to ensure that the entity's operations are conducted in accordance with laws and regulations. So they have to ensure that the laws and regulations are being maintained. So the responsibility for the prevention and the detection of non-compliance also rests with the management. So prevention they have to do, but also detection they are only responsible. So the auditor's consideration of compliance with laws and regulations is that the auditor cannot and is not responsible for preventing NOCLAR, which is non-compliance with the rules and regulations. So the auditor cannot be held responsible for that for NOCLAR, but the fact that an audit is carried out may, however, act as a deterrent. The auditor needs to consider the impact of any non-compliance on the financial statements and assess the risk of material misstatement by considering the various laws and regulations which clients must comply with and how the auditor should respond. So here the auditor's job is that it should check for all the risks of material misstatement, and because of the non-compliance of the rules and regulations, then it should assess those risks and assess the materiality, and then think about how he should respond. Suppose I am an auditor and NOCLAR has been discovered. Now what will I do? When the auditor becomes aware of information concerning a possible instance of non-compliance, the auditor should obtain an understanding of the nature of the act and the circumstances in which it has occurred, and seek further information to evaluate the possible effect on the financial statements. So now we will see how material it is. What is the effect on financial statements? This may require amendments to both amounts and disclosure. All such information and evaluation should be fully documented. So a lot of informations and disclosures are required, and these disclosures should be fully properly documented. The auditor may conclude that the withdrawal from the engagement is necessary. It can also decide to withdraw when the entity does not take the remedial action. In case remedial action is not taken, that the auditor considers necessary in the circumstances even when NOCLAR is not material to the financial statements. However, ISA 250 and IESBA code also emphasize that withdrawal should not be used by firms as a substitute for responding appropriately to any NOCLAR at a client. So suppose a NOCLAR is discovered, what the auditor does is it takes the more information and disclosures and documents those information. On that basis, it decides that it is material. If it is material, then obviously we have to either qualify the opinion, or disclaimer of opinion must be there if there is sufficient, if there is no sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to prove. But if it is not material, the NOCLAR is not material, then the auditor will give some remedial actions to the management, and if those remedial actions are not taken, then the auditor will consider of the withdrawal. But just withdrawing will not be considered as a substitute for not responding to any NOCLAR. So if the deficiency in the financial statements related to the compliance of laws and regulations is proved, and it is not being complied with, and it is material, so what will the actions that the auditor will take? When the auditor concludes that the non-compliance has a material effect on the financial statements which have not been amended, they should express a qualified or adverse opinion. And if we have insufficient audit evidence, then disclaimer or adverse. So finally, if we say for NOCLAR, it is ISA 250 in summary means that for rules and regulations to be followed, it is the responsibility of the management. If the management does not comply it will not be like if it is being audited, then all the duty is upon the auditor. Or auditing is just, it will act as a deterrent that NOCLAR will not happen. But when the auditor is auditing the financial statements, he will check and assess the risks related to the NOCLAR. Then how will he respond? If he finds that NOCLAR is not material, then he will ask the management to do some remedial actions. If the management does not do those remedial actions, then it will consider withdrawing. After doing all the properly documentation of all the information and disclosures, it will decide that I will withdraw. But just because he has the option to withdraw, he cannot just withdraw and say that I am free from this and I will not be considered wrong here if I am not complying, if there is non-compliance. Secondly, if the non-compliance is material, then he will see whether he has to express a qualified, that is an adverse opinion or a qualified opinion here, or he has to issue a qualified or disclaimer of opinion. So here he will do a disclaimer of opinion where there is no sufficient audit evidence regarding the NOCLAR that has happened. He is not being able to decide. He does not have audit evidence. He is not being supported by the management. So in that case, he will do a disclaimer of opinion if he feels that there is a lot of risk to the financial statements and the management is not supporting me and it is material. If it was not material, he would have withdrawn, but it is material. So now he will make a disclaimer of opinion, or if it is not that pervasive to the whole financial statements, he will issue a qualified opinion. So this was all about chapter 1. Moving on to chapter 2. Code of Ethics and Conduct. The IESBA, that is International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, a body of IFASC, lays down fundamental principles in its International Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants. The fundamental principles of two associations are extremely similar. The IASB also issues quality management standards and auditing standards which work together to promote auditor independence and audit quality. So, what are the fundamental principles? Of auditing? integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and lastly, professional behavior. These three together equal to professional skepticism. So, responding to threats, the use of professional skepticism is also enforced as being interrelated with fundamental ethical principles. Now, next, professional public interest entities. PI. The IESBA code now requires an active decision on what is considered a public interest entity, so the appropriate level of independence can be applied and formally disclosed by the firm if acting for such a client. Working for the same firm dramatically increases the risk of a self-review threat. So, I think PI is clear that for these kind of firms there is an additional level of independence and formal disclosures that are required. Now next, if we are working for the same firm for audit and for other services, it provides a self-review threat. Despite this, however, many companies choose this arrangement and sell it to their shareholders as a way of improving quality and reducing agency costs. In some cases, savings of around 30% of all audit costs have been reported. It raises the question of what serves the company's stakeholders better, greater audit objectivity or smaller audit fees. So there are two things that happens here. Objectivity is hampered, but they have small audit fees. So what do the management go for? That is their choice. In general, firms cannot accept any management responsibilities for an audit client and must always actively consider risk factors such as the nature of the engagement, nature of the client, and the perception of a reasonable and informed third party in determining the extent of any ethical threats. The code also prohibits a firm from assuming any management responsibility for an audit client, as it creates a self-interest, self-review, advocacy, and familiarity threat. This was a smaller chapter. Moving on to chapter 3. First, we will discuss ISA 240. Earlier, we had discussed ISA 250 related to rules and regulations. Now, we will discuss ISA 240, which is auditor's responsibilities, relating to fraud in financial statements. There are two types of misstatements that are caused by fraud. Fraud causes two types of misstatements. First is a misstatement which happens due to fraudulent financial reporting. And second is a type of misstatement that happens due to misappropriation of assets. So what is the responsibility of the auditor here? The auditor should obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatements, whether caused by fraud or error. Reasonable assurance that financial statements are free from material misstatement, whether it is from fraud or error. Though here in this standard we are covering fraud. So what are the specific objectives for this assurance? What is the objective of getting this assurance? Because this way we can identify and assess the risk of material misstatement due to fraud, and then we can also obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence regarding the assessed risk of material misstatement due to fraud through designing and implementing appropriate responses. And then we can respond to those fraud or suspected fraud identified during the audit. So what should be the audit approach here? The auditor should obtain an understanding of how those charged with governance exercise oversight of management's processes for identifying and responding to the risks of fraud, and the internal control that management has established to mitigate these risks as part of the ongoing risk management process. So the audit approach is here that it will obtain an understanding of internal controls, of how risks are identified by those charged with governance and managed. What are the examples of fraud risk factors? In determining an approach to fraud, auditors should consider the conditions that lead to fraud. What are the conditions that can lead to fraud? A motive, an incentive or pressure to commit fraud, a perceived opportunity, and an ability to rationalize the fraudulent action. So this was all about it. Next, the procedures when misstatements are discovered. The auditor evaluates the audit evidence obtained to ensure it is consistent and that it achieves its aim of answering the risks of fraud. This will include a consideration of results of analytical procedures and any misstatements found. So what the auditor does is, when he has evaluated the audit evidence to ensure that it is consistent and that it achieves its aim of answering the risks of fraud, so he will now when he gets all the audit evidence, he will evaluate it and see the result of those analytical procedures and see if there are any misstatements that are found. Then it will be communicated to those charged with governance, where it involves management, employees who have significant roles in internal control, and others where fraud results in material misstatement in financial statements. So, in short, ISA 240 is relating to the auditor's responsibilities to fraud in a financial statement. How does fraud happen? It happens because of the management does the fraudulent financial reporting, or it will do misappropriation of assets. These are the two types of fraud, and this will lead to misstatements in the financial statements. The responsibility of the auditor is to have a reasonable assurance that the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatements, from fraud or error. For this, it will identify and assess the financial statements, obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to assess about the assessed risk of material misstatement, and respond appropriately to the assessed risk of material misstatements due to fraud. Then, after that, it will obtain an understanding of the internal controls that are there of the management, and what the management is doing for identifying and managing the assessed risks. Then here in the middle we try to understand what is how does a fraud occur. Occurs because there is a motive behind the fraud, there is an opportunity for committing the fraud, or there is an ability. I am in a position where I have the ability to rationalize the fraudulent action. So after all the understanding of the management is done, after understanding what amount of materiality is there in the financial statements relating to the assessed risk or material misstatement, then an evaluation is done, and after the evaluation is done, then it will be communicated to those charged with governance in case it involves management or it involves employees who have significant roles in internal control. And if it is material to the financial statements, then it will also involve communicating to those charged with governance, because it will involve others as well, any other types of fraud. And consequently, in the auditor's report, if it will be relating to insufficient or inappropriate audit evidence, disclaimer of opinion or qualified opinion. If it is uncorrected fraud leading to material misstatement, then it will be qualified adverse opinion. And the auditor can also consider a withdrawal from the engagement if they uncover exceptional circumstances with regard to fraud. So here in case there can be conclusion, three types of conclusion. If there is insufficient audit evidence, disclaimer. If it is material misstatement, adverse, withdrawal. If exceptional circumstances are there. So now, what is the auditor's liability? Auditors can be found guilty of financial market abuse offences such as insider dealing, since they are privy to inside information and may use this information for their own gain. Auditors could also be found guilty of a criminal offence if they knew or suspected a person was laundering money and they either tipped off or failed to report their suspicions to the appropriate authority. As a basic rule, demonstrating that the firm followed auditing standards would probably be seen as a strong defence against claims of negligence from audit clients. The key difference between the third parties and the companies is that the third parties have no contract with the audit firm. There is therefore no implied duty of care, but the circumstances of the relationship between the audit firm and any third party might create a duty of care. A duty of care to a third party may arise when an accountant does not know that their work will be relied by a third party, but only knows that it is a work of kind which is liable in the ordinary course of events to be relied on by a third party. The auditing profession is concerned about the extent of their liability to third parties. They argue that although they are required to have insurance, they are unable to get sufficient insurance cover to meet the potential level of claims. Also, even if other parties such as directors share an element of responsibility for misleading financial statements, audit firms argue that they still bear the burden of giving financial compensation while trying to act in good faith. So, in all these cases, what is auditor's liability? It is relating to insider trading, because it does have information which is privy to the financial statements, relating to tipping off or hiding or helping the firm in money laundering. But if the auditor is acting in good faith, so there is no negligence, then it can save itself. But in case of third parties, here we have to see if there is a duty of care. Even if the duty of care is existing or not existing, if the auditor has the slightest idea that its work will be relied on by a third party, then it is liable to that third party in case of ordinary course of events. So the auditing profession, they have to pay liability to third parties as well. So in this case, they are unable to get insurance completely, and they still have to bear the compensation. So ACCA requires that all firms which hold practicing an audit certificate will have PII with a reputable insurance company. If the firm has employees, it will also have fidelity guarantee insurance. Here, this means professional indemnity insurance. So, auditors may reduce the chances of litigation by ensuring that they have good procedures. So, for this, they have to ensure good procedures over client acceptance. The client that I'm accepting, that should be after good procedures. Quality audit should be there. I have proper good procedures for performance of audit work and compliance. With the standards. So the expectation gap that arises due to a general misunderstanding by the public of the respective responsibilities of both management and the auditor, and a misunderstanding of the scope of the audit. So this was all about this chapter. Thank you.